Hey, and welcome back to another episode of An Animated Conversation. I'm Randy Myers. My guest today is Frank Molieri.
And I'm like, this is a great opportunity. You're getting drawn, you get pulled into it, and you just don't know, like, why. Time I would make caricatures of them, and I would add like a body of a frog attached to their head because they're like, they don't talk, they require a lot of animation. Usually the animation is put on once. There were guys that would cry, they couldn't handle the notes.
Okay, so Frank Molieri is my guest today. Director, producer, animator. You've worked at, Don Bluth. You've worked at Warner Brothers, DreamWorks, Hasbro. You've worked on characters like Charlie Brown. You've
Correct.
worked on Curious George. What other miles? Oh, Tom and Jerry. Can't forget that. The Simpsons. Trolls.
SpongeBob.
SpongeBob. So you've been around, Frank.
It's Randy, it's crazy. I remember, I think I was like 22 years old when I joined the business. And now I'm like 50, just turned 53, and it's like an eye blink. It's an eye blink how time just flies by.
But it all started when, Frank?
When I was 6 years old, I remember I couldn't put the pencil down. It was always like sketching caricatures. Whoever the president was at the time, I would make caricatures of them, and I would add like a body of a frog attached to their head, and I would just do all this funny drawings, and all my friends were like laughing, and they was just getting, I do another one, or do this, or do that, and that just kept going on. I don't think it ever stopped. Really, never stopped. All throughout, even if I started focusing more on math and science, that sketchpad, man, it was always there. I was always doodling something, and somebody was always asking me to do something, So yeah, ever since a very young age.
Well, was there somebody who supported the drawing that kept you motivated, kept you wanting to do it, or was it just self-motivated that you enjoyed it?
I think it was self-motivated. My grandmother used to paint, and I think she did encourage that, but I didn't live with her. But whenever I did see her, it was just a joy, because it was like, oh, show me this, or let me see what you're working on. And she was just inspirational. She never made a career out of it, but it was somebody in the family that did paintings, that actually liked to draw. And I don't know, it's that world that pulls you in,
And where was this? Where did you grow up?
Nicaragua. I don't know if you knew that. My parents are migrants, from Italy. And actually my great-great-grandfather, he was a conductor in Italy, and he was asked to come over and conduct the Philharmonic of Nicaragua. And he said, I'm not gonna pass that opportunity. So the Molieris were brought over to Nicaragua. So we're like, well, we kind of like weren't really from there, but we were there. And then in I think it was 79, we came over to the States.
And where'd you land?
Well, my dad, we landed in Florida for a bit. My parents were already split even way before that. And so he stayed there. And my mother had a sister in California that lived here, and an aunt that lived here, been here for years. So it was easier for her to come over and be in California, where she actually had family.
Were you drawing all that time? Did you ever give up drawing for any period of time? Or
I gotta tell you, even back then, the cartoons that were popular were like Tom and Jerry's, right? As a kid, because they didn't talk. So the Tom and Jerry's, you can put them anywhere. It's all this pantomime, right? It's all this musically driven action. The music instruments actually do the talking for the characters. So it was great as a kid. Oh man, Tom and Jerry, they're beating each other up, and you're like, oh, this is fantastic.
Yeah, physical comedy. Physical comedy. That's the international language.
I remember, like, you get out as soon as the bell rings, man, you run home and you turn the TV on, and there's the UPA Popeye playing. And Popeye, they translated that, right? So I would definitely listen to it in Spanish, right? But Popeye, the black and white, I grew up with that, and I just found it so inspirational. It was just fun. It was like, man, this is so great. I couldn't stop watching that stuff. And that was in my country, and I came out down here. Same thing, nothing changed. I remember when I was in high school, I would run, man. I get off that bus, run home, and see if I could catch He-Man. It's like He-Man was like It was almost like at 2 o'clock or 2:30, and if you were a few minutes late, you missed the beginning, and I never wanted to miss that.
If you were a child of the 70s or 80s, your life was scheduled based on cartoons for the morning before school, to the afternoon when you came home, to Saturday mornings. That's what your life kind of revolved around, was the cartoon schedule.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. Saturday mornings, man, it was all the Hanna-Barbera stuff. And you don't know that it's going to become a career, but you definitely get it's almost like this, you get pulled into it, and you just don't know like why. It's just something, I think every one of us have that in us. Some of us become doctors, attorneys, and for us, yourself included, we're artists. There's something inside that says this is where you're meant to do this, follow that vision, follow that dream.
So let's start connecting the dots here then. You love cartoons, you love animation. At what point did you put those together as a career and start pursuing that as a career?
It was an accident. I just never thought you could make a living. I had no one with when my parents, split up. I didn't have an adult voice saying, hey, you can make a career doing this. There was really no guidance. It was basically if I stumbled upon information, or if I heard, or if I had a friend that was doing something, then I would follow that. Back in the 80s, you really didn't have the internet like you do now. The information was harder to come by. So I ended up getting a 4-year scholarship to UCLA. And I thought, you know what? A doctor sounds pretty good. You could give back to society. You're helping people. And I really thought maybe that's what I'm going to do, right? And, so I ended up going to UCLA. And I had taken some life drawing classes in high school. And that kind of stopped. But I had that thirst even after that. And when I was working full time, going to school full time. So I don't have no idea how I got this little pamphlet, and it says life drawing classes at the Motion Picture NPSC local 839, and 6:30 to 9:30 every Monday, or you had this times that I could actually do and squeeze in. So I started taking life drawing classes at the Union with Glenn Vilpu, and some of the fellow artists that were right next to me, they looked at my work and they said, hey, you should be working at a studio. They were surprised I wasn't working at a studio. They were like, I guess they liked the stuff, and I was really surprised that they actually liked my work. And I couldn't believe it. And I ended up, taking their advice. I piled a whole bunch of drawings together. I brought them over to Don Bluth. One of the guys actually worked at Don Bluth. He said, bring it over, we're hiring. And I didn't think nothing was going to happen. I'm thinking, I don't know what this is. And even if I get hired, I'm going to school, what's going to happen? So anyways, something in my head said, whatever you have, put it together, bring it over, and see what happens. And the very next day, it was like weird. The very next day I get a call and they say, hey, can you come over and take a test? We like your work. We want you to, they gave me a cleanup test. Cleaning up this, we had to do an in-between. It's like an in-between of the witch kissing. It's for Dragon Slayer 2. And I was a fan of Dragon Slayer. So it's like all this surreal stuff that you grow up playing the game, and all of a sudden you're at the studio that actually does the animation for the game, wanting to hire you. And for me, it's like, well, this is incredible, right? And somehow I passed the test. They call me again the next day, when can you start? And I'm like, I got to give at least 2 weeks notice to the people I work for right now. And then the dilemma that I had was, do I drop out of school? What do I do? So I ended up taking an honorable withdrawal from school so I can pursue what I thought was just going to be maybe a summer class, a summer job at Bluth. And that turned out to be a career that I'm still enjoying. So I never really went back to school.
So why did you choose Don Bluth?
Yeah, over the other studios, I think I had watched The Land Before Time before. I love what they were doing. It seemed that I would have a better opportunity there than let's say had I tried going over to Disney, which I didn't think I was ready for. And I remember Disney had just, I think they had just laid off some people because of the poor showing of Oliver and Company, but they were in the midst of finishing up The Little Mermaid, and there's a lot of excitement. I remember there's so much excitement within the class, within the industry about The Little Mermaid. And of course, when it came out, it's a incredible box office hit, as you know. But Bluth turned out that I learned so much. I think within 6 months, everything had clicked. Like how to approach an in-between, what's a cleanup, how do you extremes, and you really learn the fundamentals. I think you yourself always talk about learn the fundamentals. You can apply it in everything that you do later on.
Right, but wait, did you not get any formal animation training before working at Bluth? Was it all on the job training at Bluth?
Yeah, all on the job. I think I had all the years of me just drawing on my own, right? It was enough, I guess, to understand it. It was a natural fit. What can I tell you? It just fit so well. It was so easy. It's like, oh, I get this. Oh, yeah, this is pretty easy. You watch what other people are doing. And I don't know if I ever told you this, but I ended up, I get hired at Bluth. And of course, you didn't make a lot of money, but that didn't matter at the time. Just the fact that you were getting paid to draw. And I didn't finish telling you the story before, but I'm gonna tell you now. So you're getting paid, I don't know what it was, maybe $450 a week or so back then. And you're getting this check and you just can't believe it. That you're actually drawing and you're getting paid to draw. It's like, it doesn't feel right. I'm so used to working hard and sweating and all of that and going someplace, putting a tie on and all of that. And all of a sudden I'm sitting down wearing a t-shirt, jeans, the complete opposite of what I've done before, right? And you're getting paid. And it was just, you feel so blessed. You feel so lucky, right? And something happened, I would say maybe within 6 months. I'm looking at the check and I'm like, I'm not getting paid enough. It's like, it went from just like being so like, it quickly it's how, it's like almost like if you're starting as an artist, starting artist, and Disney says, hey, would you like to work here for free? And most people would say, hell, absolutely, right? I'll do it. But it won't last long, right? So it was kind of the same thing for me. Like I thought, I couldn't believe I was getting paid to draw, and then I immediately, within a few months, it was like, I'm not getting paid enough. But I learned a lot at Bluth. It was fantastic.
Was it Bluth over in Burbank by the Burbank Airport next to the cemetery? Was it that space?
That's the space, yeah. And it was awesome because you come in, right? Back then you had to punch in your time card. And as soon as you came in, they had Dragon Slayer and Space Ace right there. So it was always tempting to, let me get a round of Space Ace before I get into work. But it was just so wonderful. Just the atmosphere was so creative, and of course, John Pomeroy was the lead artist in that division, in that part of the studio. Don was working out of Ireland. He was in the Ireland location, and Don and John had the Burbank area.
So which films for Don did you work on?
I started on, it was the end of Rock-a-Doodle, and we did a Troll in Central Park. We did Thumbelina. We worked on Penguin and the Pebble, which is the rock opera. I forget. I ended up leaving. They had some financial problems there, and I ended up leaving to Warner's. I think I ended up working for Ralph Bakshi for a little bit on Cool World. Don't hate me, Don, because I love you, and I think you're very talented. But they were not the best films that he had done at the time. And I mean, you knew the film you're working on because sometimes you go see like the animatics, and of what the movie's coming out, and you're like, oh man, we're working so hard for this movie and it's not very good. But at the end of the day, you really enjoy working there so much because there was so much care. Like every eyelash, every line that you put down on that paper, there was so much love given that you really forgot about the whole thing. And you're like, okay, you know what? I'm going to do my part, and I trust that everyone else will do theirs. And you hope that everything just comes together at the end. And you start forgetting about the big picture and work on your draftsmanship, which is really what I was doing there.
So when you were there and you started at doing rough in-betweens, where did you get to start animating?
Oh, it's almost immediately. I think they went from rough in between. I did a little bit of cleanup. There's something else that I did, I'll tell you in a minute. And I went into, I became an assistant animator, and I started doing a lot of the secondary action for the animators and doing some of the secondary keys for them. I would say within 6 months, within a year, I felt like I was ready to animate. Like everything happened really quick, and it clicked. and it was through hard work. It really, like, I put a lot into it, but it was easy.
Who was mentoring you or teaching you, all the ins and outs of animation? Was there one person or was it a bunch of them?
You learn from a whole bunch. I think John definitely set the bar pretty high, John Pomeroy. But there was a gentleman, Mark Putliner. I will never forget him. He was extremely patient with me, and he would always like really go out of his way to explain movement and really lay out the graphs and in betweens and timing. It was like I learned a lot of timing from him and how to put a lot of thought into your work. Like he would say, before you start animating, you really have to act your scene out, act it over and over and over and over and over to the point that you have to feel it. You should feel it before you really draw it, before you get into it. And it's the same thing even now, even when you're boarding or when you're thinking of something, of a drawing or a pose. If you don't feel it, it just never comes out right. So it really just so valuable what I learned at Bluth.
We started getting close to crossing paths right after you had worked on Once Upon a Forest. And we did an internship together at Turner Feature Animation, which was right next to the studio or the location where you did Once Upon a Forest. So we worked at Turner for a little while. So was it after Turner you went to Warner Brothers?
Actually, you weren't in the internship. I came in as a cleanup artist, key cleanup. I was doing key assisting work on there, but that's where I met you.
Yeah.
You were considered the talent. That was more like the workhorse. You go over here and clean that up.
No, I don't know if we were cheap labor is what we were. That's what we were at the time. That was our way into the business. So, but I had the same experience you did, like looking at the first paycheck and being amazed. Oh wow, I'm just gonna keep my head down, my mouth shut, and just keep working and be happy that I'm getting paid to do this. So, yeah. So okay, so you worked on the films at Turner, you went over to Warner's, and then what was your first gig at Warner's?
I luckily I ended up working at Warner Classics, and they did a lot of special projects, from commercials to shorts to motion rides. It was just a great, wonderful place to go. I left the Pagemaster because Warner's had an opportunity, and I remember David Steinberg at the time just not being too happy with me, and because he was supposed to make me an animator, and it never happened. So I'm like, hey, I got this opportunity at Warner's, and he goes, Frank, you know what? You're the reason why I'm thinking of putting our artists under contract from now on. And I'm like, well, come on. So, he's over at Nickelodeon now, so I think, and I know he probably forgot all about that incident, so I'm glad it's not coming back to haunt me, right? But yeah, I ended up going to Warner's, and I got to tell you, because when you're working for Bluth, you use a lot of live action reference, and you felt sometimes as an animator that you were losing your chops. You're like, this is like, you got to follow the photo stats, and the timing was different. Obviously there's still a lot of skill required to do that kind of work, but when I went to Warner, there were no photo stats. Live action reference, you never needed it. To draw Bugs Bunny, the Tasmanian Devil, or Tweety Bird, it was all, I felt like my time at Warner's is really where I developed the most as an animator, as a board artist, as a director, because it was really, you learn the timing from the old masters, even from watching stuff. And and Chuck was the life at the time. He would come in and give talks, or every now and then we'll have a one-on-one, because he still wanted to come into Warner Classics, with his love for all the Looney Tunes. And Fritz Freeling would come in, and so I learned a lot from watching their work. And then it all came back, a lot of the little things that I had learned at Bluth, like you got to draw what you feel, and the Looney Tunes really brought that out of you. It's like, you got to draw by emotion. You can see it in Chuck Jones's work. He drew what he felt, and you can, for me, I see it as he got older, his drawings got older. Coyote looked older because that's why he was so good. What he felt came right out of his hands, and that connection, it's incredible. I find that I met artists that are draftsmen, and they just draw. Right away, they're good drawers. Their draftsmanship is amazing, and even when they get older, they're still great artists. But then you have the ones that maybe they're not the best draftsmen, but they draw from emotion, and their work has got so much life and feeling and emotion, right? It's just so great. And then you have some of those that are pretty lucky that actually can draw from emotion, that are great draftsmen. And that puts my thing at a very elite level. And I always strive to let me get close to that, you know.
Did you have a lot of interaction with Frizz and Chuck?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other interesting thing about you, Frank, is you're creative and artistic, but you're also kind of cerebral too. So you understand both sides of animation. You get the the looseness, the creativity, the freedom, but then you also understand the technical side to everything too, and you appreciate that, and you're able to kind of bridge those two gaps a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the importance of being able and understanding both sides of that, how that benefits you?
I think for me, it's something that you learn. It obviously takes time, right? An experience to see when you put a drawing or when you're calling for something, you're boarding a panel, what that's going to do later down on the road, down the process. If you're creating something that maybe you can't achieve, is unproducible, they call it, but you don't know that. But to me, it's like I understood the camera work, and I understood what the abilities of what an animator could do at the time, right? Even now. And once you understand those limitations, you put it all together and you say, okay, this is what this is going for. If you have a whole bunch of effects, how are we going to pull that off? How are we going to do this? And it's important to understand the whole thing. And like, when is the sound effects are going to come in to help you out with the visuals or the music? How are you going to draw your audience into what you have? So for me, you really got to have an understanding of the whole thing, right? To really deliver, to control the production, I think, of an episodic series, you know.
And was it at Warner Brothers you got to direct? Was that the first time you got to direct?
I got to direct. I was 20, I believe I was 29 years old, and they offered me, they say, hey, we want you to direct. And I'm like, I'm not sure I'm ready. I said, are you sure you don't think I'm gonna ruin things here? No. It's usually the other way around. You're supposed to be like, hey, I'm ready to go. But I knew that we had clients like Pepsi or like what's some of the other clients? We had MCI, like the phone company, and we did there's some high profile clients, and I really thought that I wasn't ready. Like, I'm gonna mess this thing up. And they have faith in me. And one thing about directing at Warner's was that as a director, you had access to basically to the client, and you pitched your ideas to them. I mean, obviously internally to your executives. Once your team bought into it, you kind of pitched the boards to them, you know, and they gave you a concept board and you turn it into a production board, but you're constantly talking to them back and forth on what they needed for their product. And as a director, you laid out your scenes, you animated many times. You control like what color backgrounds you wanted to use. There were many times where we did all the sound spotting. So at times you talk to your composer what kind of music you're looking for, and you collaborated with the agency and went to the mixes. So as a director at Warner's, I really learned the whole business side of things too. And I learned that you're providing a service really to whoever that is. Nowadays, you may be doing it for Hulu, you may be doing it for Netflix, but there's always a client, there's always the show business, right? And my old boss, Kathleen Helpe, used to say, Frank, this is why it's called show business, not just show. Because I would come up with these crazy ideas and go, no, we can't do that, right? And it's just the business side.
Well, that's the difference. That's the difference between being a student filmmaker or an independent filmmaker or working in an industry. There's always somebody you're working for, whether it's your supervisor, your director, your producer, or a client. There's always somebody else that has a say and wants to contribute that you have to listen to or take a note from. And how you take a note and respond to it kind of depends on how professional you are. I think a lot of people have a problem with feedback and notes, and they take it too personally. And, you know, it's just something you have to deal with on a regular basis.
Yeah, you know, I learned, well, I got to tell you, man, working at Bluth beats that out of you. There were guys that would cry. They couldn't handle the notes. Bluth was definitely a tough place. Any Bluthies listening to this, you know what I'm talking about. you had to learn how to take criticism at Bluth because they were chop you down to size over there. You have to just be able to take it all. Just, don't take anything personal. But I learned a lot more about this working at Warner's and dealing with the live action agencies or the live action crew. We had an art director that would kind of come out across rude, or say that your drawings are crap. But this is pretty crappy. And then in the beginning, you're like, oh, you kind of like, as an artist, we all get a little attached to our work sometimes, and we get like, you get hurt a bit. Mm-hmm. But all that, I got to tell you, man, it all went away. Like I realized quickly, that's how he's just saying it. He could use a different word. But a lot of times you just tell me if you like it or if you don't like it. And you learn that I'm giving you guys a service. You don't like this drawing, well, I can do another one. Or if you don't like this setup, I can give you a different setup or a different idea. And that, so invaluable, because I took that and I brought it over with me to features, some of the features that I worked in. I brought it over to the TV shows that I've supervised. Like you learn when an executive gives you a note, it's just a note.
Right.
I never take it personal. I learned, it was just great to learn that, to be thrown into the deep end and have somebody critique your work and being rude about it. And then you quickly realize it's not personal. This is a business. We're trying to achieve a common goal here. And sometimes you got to hear things you don't want that are not pleasing to an artist, but you move forward.
Yeah, you gotta grow a thick skin sometimes, and just let stuff roll off your back and not affect you, or just keep moving.
I did that pretty quick.
Before I forget though, it's funny you mentioned David Steinberg, you mentioned Bluth, and I don't know if you guys talked about it at the time when you were working with him at Turner, but when you were at Bluth, you were probably working on a desk that David Steinberg stained when he was a young man, and his first job was staining desks at Bluth. Did you guys ever talk about that?
We didn't. Oh, okay. When I see him next, I'm going to bring that up.
And then the next circle of life is he bought back one of those desks that he thinks was one of them that he stained from Daryl Van Sitters, who had bought a storage unit that Don Bluth was selling off, and it was full of old animation desks from back in the Bluth Studio period.
Wow.
So it's, things all come kind of full circle.
David, you did a great job. I love my desk.
That's right.
I'm going to talk to David when I see him.
Perfect color. Yeah. And by the way, you mentioned David's running, he's like the GM at Nickelodeon now. When he bought that desk, he put it on display. It's part of a display at Nickelodeon right now.
Oh, I'm going to have to stop by and go see it.
Yep.
You have to
take it for a test. So Warner Brothers happened. And then what happened after Warner Brothers?
After Warner's, I ended up going to Klasky Chupo and the Rugrats, the Wild Thornberries. And for me, that was another different style of doing things. However, I ended up going to their commercial division, which is really what they wanted me for. And I don't know how long that lasted, maybe a little over a year. We had the unfortunate event of 9/11, back in 2001, and advertising really slowed down. I think it dropped all the way down to maybe there was only 30% of the work being done. And if you weren't some of those 30% getting the work, it seemed like the world stopped.
So what were you doing at Klasky? Were you boarding or directing or doing?
I was directing there. I was directing.
You were directing, okay.
I was directing, yeah. And again, fun. I mean, it's fun. Because a lot of times with Klasky, the one thing it brought a little more reality. Like at Warner Brothers, yes, we did spec work, right? You had to pitch an idea to get the job. But a lot of times the client really wanted to use Bugs Bunny. So they had to go through Warner's, or they wanted to use Daffy or whoever the Looney Tunes character was. But you still had to sell the idea to the client, right? To the agency. So they can pick you as the people producing the spot or to pick you as the director. Because they had other directors. So you still had to do a little bit of the presentation and earn that right. Klasky was completely different. A lot of times with Klasky Chupo, we did spec work. You did a treatment. You're out in the real world. And that brought a little bit more of that reality that, hey, you're competing against, it wasn't just national, it was national. Sometimes it was the world, because sometimes you compete against, I think Chuck Cammett was in Canada, I forget where, but agencies get bids from different directors all around in different parts of the country. And Klasky was like that, where you had to have a treatment for a spot. You did some presentation panels and you pitched your idea to the agency and you got awarded the job. So again, that brought more of a reality way of making a living. And if you didn't, if you didn't do it right, they pass on you. And
So you were saying you were at Klasky just before 9/11?
it was just right after. I was there during 9/11.
Okay.
Before I got hired before, then it happened. Things slowed down, and we still did some commercials, but it was harder to get the work. You really had to go after it.
Okay, so that happened. Then where'd you bounce to after Klasky?
I think I ended up going back to Warner's. They had hired me. I think they hired me to produce some Tom and Jerry's. Like nobody wanted to do them because they don't talk. They require a lot of animation. Usually the animation is put on once. Every frame you got to move the character, do the characters moving, keep them alive. They don't talk, so you got to rely on more acting. So nobody wanted to do it, and I'm like, this is a great opportunity. So we ended up doing Tom and Jerry's for an international, as you might have it. It was like if you ranked the popularity of Tom and Jerry's back then, they were like top 5.
They still are around the world. Yeah, they still are on Cartoon Network. Oftentimes, the old Tom and Jerry's would beat out any of the new programming. Yeah, it's crazy.
The 40s.
But it kind of comes full circle for you because you were saying as a kid you used to watch Tom and Jerry's, and then you got the opportunity to direct and produce some Tom and Jerry's, right?
Yeah, it's just really bizarre. Like even the Looney Tunes, right? And to actually draw out the Tom and Jerry's. One thing that you learn for every job I've had, you learn appreciation for the folks that did it before you. The amount, because you could look at it, but not until you do it do you realize the amount of skill that's required to pull something like that off. And you're like, wow, this is just so brilliant. And you're watching something, you don't really appreciate it, but now it's your turn to do it. And you're like, oh my gosh, how do they do it? And you start looking into it and you see the physics, you see the thinking. Back then to what Mark Putliner was telling me back at booth, dude, put some thinking. And then everything comes together like, oh yeah, that's what that meant. And you can see the thinking that went behind. Like if you look at Jerry, from Tom and Jerry, the mouse running, or going around the corner, there's so much physics. It's like a little water balloon getting pulled and stretched, and like his head would turn and the legs are scrambled in place, or their anticipations is not just like 4 frames back and then forward. Their antics are like the different body parts move at different rates and speed, and you really feel the pull and the energy. There's a lot of inertia that you feel. So that takes a lot of understanding about timing, drawing. It's almost like you gotta have it all to pull those things off. So we did. So back to Tom and Jerry at Warner's, we did that for international. We didn't know how it was gonna be received, so I ended up going to Universal to work on Curious George season 2, and that was interesting because that was actually my first time ever doing anything for children, like an educational show where you have an actual agenda before you actually start to tell you this is what you need to teach the kids, or this is the learning, the syllabus, not the syllabus, but they had a little, like a goal, and you couldn't really deviate from that. Like you had to stick to that. So anyways, I went to Universal. 7 months later, I get a call from Warner's, hey, can you come back? Because it was like a hit, this Tom and Jerry stuff, and they wanted to do more. And Universal had only hired me as a director on Curious George. Tom and Jerry, they had hired me as a supervising producer. So I'm like, I got to leave, and nobody likes it when you leave, right? So I ended up going back to Warner's. And I think after that, I worked on SpongeBob, the movie with Steve Hillenburg, Steve Hillenburg and Derek Dryman. And remember I told you don't take any notes personal?
Yes.
Derek Dryman, man, we just he give you a note, him and Steve, right? And you're about to go question, and they won't even let you have a question. They just say, that's the note. And they walk away. Had I not experienced before, don't take anything personal, I may have been hurt. Wow, these guys really don't care. But the fact is that they have to go somewhere else. Their days are packed. This is the note. Please take the note, execute it, bye. We don't have time for you to rebuttal here. Give me your thoughts and stuff. So it really all comes together, and you start appreciating what people do.
So that's SpongeBob the movie, and you did animation on that?
I did. No, they hired me to be the. I did everything blends together, man. They hired me to be the supervisor on the live action sequence,
Oh, wow.
which is
That's
the one
pretty
with David Hasselhoff in
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
Bikini
yeah.
Bottom, the whole thing. And I had just come off. I'm sorry, Randy. I skipped the thing where I got hired at on Back in Action.
Oh, Looney Tunes Back in Action. Yeah.
Looney Tunes Back in Action, yeah.
The sequel to Space Jam.
And I also did a little bit of work in Space Jam. That's what. Remember, I said we do little jobs in between the big jobs. Yeah. There's a lot of little things like that throughout my career. And so, anyways, I get hired. I got hired at on Back in Action, and Aaron Perry. I forget Aaron. Aaron's the producer's name. He wanted me pretty badly on SpongeBob because they wanted to make sure that they didn't make any mistakes that we had made on Back in Action. Like, hey, bring everything that you learn, he says, over to our production so that we don't make any of those mistakes. And I remember having my interview with Steve. It was Gina, Shay, Steve, and Derek Dryman. I only knew Aaron. I had never met Steve. And prior to that meeting, I hadn't seen SpongeBob. As you know, like anybody that works in TV, mm-hmm. Your hours are long. You know yourself, Randy. I never had time to watch TV anymore. It was like I'm working, I get home and I'm tired, and you do it all over again the next day, right?
Yeah.
And so I figured I better watch an episode of SpongeBob before I go to this interview tomorrow, right? Just so I kind of know what I'm talking about. So I watched 1 or 2 episodes. Oh, this is pretty funny. I thought this is pretty good. I like the drawings and funny stuff. So I go to this interview. I don't know anybody there. I come clean and I say, okay, guys, look, I watched an episode of your show for the first time last night. So I'm going to have to just be honest here. Before you start asking me things I don't know the answers to. So, and I think they love that. And I think it was Steven Hillenberg who said, hey, we don't want you for this. We need you for the skills that you bring, where you can take our characters and do that. So anyways, I ended up getting hired doing the job, and it was a blast. It was so much fun.
Did you also work on Osmosis Jones at Warner Brothers also?
I did a little bit, yeah, in between jobs. Yes, you worked on that.
I did development on it in between Quest for Camelot and Iron Giant. They had us, to keep us around, they had us develop things. And they let us choose a couple projects, and that was one of them that I chose. So I did some very early development, but I didn't animate. I was off doing something else when they were off animating on that.
Oh, okay. I ended up, I think I animated a little bit on the Chris Rock music video, part of it. Yeah, it was a great experience working with on SpongeBob, man. You learn, again, it's a different style. The drawings are different. I remember this gentleman, Sherm Cohen. What can he draw? That guy can draw so well, and I remember just loving the way he drew the character. The expressions were different than what I was used to doing, and again, I'm like, I took a little bit of that, and I'm like, that's pretty awesome. I'm gonna start using a little bit of that.
I used to share an office with Sherm at Cartoon Network. My gym partner's a monkey, and now Sherm is teaching classes and directing, and he's skyrocketed also.
Yeah, I had met Sherm. Before that, we were working on some Looney Tunes shorts that were a little different in humor, a little more, some Larry Doyle, I think, had done the writing on it, and I'm in this cubicle, right? And I'm boarding on this thing. I'm like, oh, this is not really Looney Tunes, but okay, I'll do my best. And I hear some guy complaining next to me, and it's Sherm. And I had to come over and say, dude, I thought I was the only one feeling that this one really on target with the Looney Tunes style. And that's how I had met Sherm briefly, because I ended up leading the shorts. Oh. Actually, from the shorts, they put me on Back in Action. But later on, when I finished Back in Action, I ran into Sherm again, and he was the layout. I think there's a supervising character layout guy on SpongeBob the movie. And he was just doing some beautiful work. So
we're up to like SpongeBob the movie. What happens after SpongeBob the movie, Frank? Where do you go?
That's another good question.
But it's clear. At this point, it's clear. Anybody that's getting into animation should be prepared to move around to different studios, do different jobs, learn different things.
Styles, yeah.
Work in different ways.
Randy, it's interesting you say that. I think anybody get in the industry, I think the industry now, it's better than it's ever been. I mean, back then, to me, it's like you had to be top artist to get a job, and you had to know somebody to at least open the door for you. Because you can know somebody that opens the door, but then you got to have the skills to be able to hold on to that job. You can't perform, just based on knowing someone alone. I think the industry is good right now. I think that part of the job is, part of the being an artist in this industry is the competition. You're always competing. You're always, and you do your darn best, man. You got to just stay on top of things. And it gets stressful and frustrating when you're looking for work. But once you get it, they're dream jobs. I mean, really, you hope that you end up working under a good director or a good supervising director or a good EP, because a bad EP can ruin the morale and just the feeling of it trickles down. So I would say at Warner Brothers, I learned to appreciate the crew that you have, and how animation is a gigantic puzzle, and how you have to treat everyone else with respect. You have to appreciate what they bring to the table, because you can't do it without them. You really can't. And I learned that at a very young age. And to me, I carry that through, that you take care of the people that work with you, for you on those shows. And again, it's like you take a little bit of this, a little experience, you start putting it all together. And for me is handle yourself with sincerity, being honest. When you compliment somebody, you be honest. When you give a critique, you got to know the angle and how to say it so that it's constructive, and you still get people working, doing their best. It's a skill that I still work on, and it's just invaluable. It's just appreciation. I think it really comes down to respecting your fellow artists. I can't say it in any more basic terms than that. You just respect your fellow artists. You appreciate what they do. Sometimes you learn from them, and you lead by example, right?
Right. Well, so let's talk about your example. So you worked at a bunch of different studios on a bunch of different projects. Have you ever worked on two projects that were set up the same way or ran the same way, or were all of them slight variations and you had to kind of figure that out and roll with it?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Randy. I don't think I've ever worked, even within the same studio, about working on shows that ran the same way. It feels like something we start the same and maybe we end the same, but in the middle, it's all different. Whatever studio you pick, your overseas studio that will be doing the animation for you, that can change the way you do things. The style of the animation that you're going for, that can change the way you do things. If you're boarding before records or if you're boarding after records, there's a lot of little pieces that you can maneuver within the production. So I think flexibility is important. I even had job duties that I've been called supervisor. I've had jobs as a supervising director where you were spotting music, you were going to the mixes, you were flying overseas to deal with the vendor studios. As a supervising director, I've also had, or at times where you're just supervising boards, or I've had a job as a supervising producer where you're actually seeing everything. So you really, I would say if I had any advice, is to stay flexible, because every job calls for slightly a different approach, or you're going to find that a production is going to need something different from you to make it succeed. And it may not be what you want to do, but you get, as a supervisor or as a leader, you start seeing the gaps where they are and you fill them in, and that's how you succeed. I think that's how you make a show work.
So let me ask you, how do you, from a supervisor's point of view, how do you avoid the inevitable problem that you're presented with when you have to make a choice between, do I take this work on that somebody else has done and fix it myself, or do I give them the note back and the opportunity for them to learn from this moment? How do you deal with that choice, and how do you deliver that message, or what's your approach on that, Frank?
Man, you're asking all the hard questions, all the good questions, and all the ones that I learned the hard way. I think when you're young, correct me if I'm wrong. I shouldn't even put age into this, but some people, it actually happens more when in your youth, where you're like, you know what? It's easier if I just do it. I'm gonna say, great, this is so good, done, right? I'm just gonna say it's approved, and I'll fix it myself. And you end up working late nights. You're having to work weekends. You burn yourself out. The artist who did the work never hears about it. I believe that that approach should only be taken if it's on the 12th hour. Like, this thing is due tomorrow. There's no time to fix it. I will handle it. But I believe you should communicate that. I think you have to be honest. You need to know how to communicate, because you need your team, number one, to help you so you can concentrate on the things that you need to be concentrating on. But it's also, they will respect you more when you're being sincere. Artists know when you're lying to them. We know, like, oh, you don't like it. Trust me, we know. If I feel like, if I see an expression in your face, we pick up on those little subtle things, and I shift or whatever that is. We know when you're not saying the truth. So for me, it's like, just be honest, say it politely. They will learn from it, and you can move on. And if they can't do it, then you make that decision and say, okay, I will take care of it, or I'll find someone else to do it, or I will do it.
So you talked about relationships. You built some relationships that have paid off, and probably because you set a good example, like you were saying also, because you worked Nickelodeon on Mighty B. You met, obviously, we both worked with Eric Weiss, but you also met Mark Taylor there. And that benefited you later on after you went to Hasbro and did Rescue Bots. You ended up going to DreamWorks TV where Mark Taylor was, or I don't know if Mark recruited you or you sought it out, but you ended up going over there to help run Trolls. What is it called? Trolls. The Beat Goes On.
The Beat Goes On, yeah, which was for Netflix, and now we're working on Trollstopia, which is for Hulu.
So also working hard, establishing those relationships can benefit you later on, because it is a small little industry. A lot of people know people, and when somebody's in charge of a project, they want to call upon people that they can trust and depend on, and know have the talent and the ability. So that's the other reason to be honest with your work and yourself and the people you're working with too. So
you have to deliver, Lorena. You have to gotta deliver, right? You have to deliver. Talking about relationships, it's you. You hooked me up with Mark Taylor. So, but you're kind of different, Randy. I think we all help each other as artists, but I've seen you really go out of your way to help us, to connect us with producers. Hey, I know somebody like this. You have been just such a blessing, man, to have as a friend, as a colleague. You're talking about relationships. So yeah, there's having someone like yourself in my group as a friend that says, hey, Frank, I know somebody, and having that respect, and you know that I'm going to deliver for you. But you really opened that door with Mark Taylor. Mark Taylor would not have ever considered me had it not been coming from you, whom he respects.
So the thing with that is comes down to, you want to work with people who make your job easier. I think that's why people want to work with you, because they can depend upon you and trust you, and they know that you'll put your best foot forward and do the best job possible and deliver. I wish more people had that same attitude, to be honest with you, because you know, I'm happy to help you out or other people out, but not everybody, when they get that opportunity, takes advantage of that opportunity. So I always wish more people would, when you put them in that position, because it reflects, you know, positively on me. And with you, it did the same thing. You went in there and you knocked it out of the park. That reflects positively on me. And that means I can help more people too, if that opportunity comes up, and I can recommend more people, because then those people, like Mark Taylor, for example, if I bring you and you deliver, the next time I bring somebody else, he's going to take that person seriously and think, oh, this is another Frank Molieri. I'm going to take that person on. So it kind of, you know, continues on and hopefully pays forward too. And maybe in some weird way, karma will come back and treat me well also down the road. Who knows? But you know, you always try to help other people out. And I always tell people too, you know, I do tell them, pay it forward. You'll be in a position someplace else. Yeah. You need to help somebody else out. It's just, it should be part of, it's not always part of, but it should be part of the industry and part of the business. It'll only benefit everybody involved. So
relationships, to me, again, you put your best foot forward. You respect what you do, you respect your peers, and you try to have fun. I think when you enjoy, when you put passion, love into your work, it just shows, you know, and it's hard work. I think if you're trying to avoid hard work, I don't think animation is your career. I think animation, there's a lot of hard work, there's long hours.
But I think also you're very diverse with the type of properties that you dealt with, because you dealt, Cool World, that's not preschool, but you have dealt with young viewer stuff like the Rescue Bots and the Peanuts and that kind of stuff. So you've run the kind of the gamut and everything in between. So you have a really strong understanding of what's needed from somebody who's working with, like you said, you were getting a lot of notes earlier on with certain type of programming, and then you get different type of notes with more adult age type of programming. So you have to know how to respond to that, how to deal with it, which things are important and which things are just somebody making a suggestion, what will serve the project the best. So now you're at DreamWorks, you're doing the troll stuff. What's the future hold for Frank Molieri?
I used to worry about the future, like, especially now my kids are older. I mean, they're going to be 17 pretty soon, but when you never really stop worrying about your future. Now it's just like, concentrate on what you have right now, give it your all, and then call Randy when you're about to finish, Randy Myers, and he'll tell you where to go. No, actually, Randy, I learned to just not worry too much. Hopefully the future will be more of the same. I mean, I love what I do. It's just anything to express your feelings creatively, your work, and be able to share things. And it's almost like going back to when I thought I was going to be a doctor, thinking, well, I want to give back to society. Well, it's almost like, in a different way, we're all giving back here. We're giving back to our kids. We're making them laugh. We're entertaining people, so it is a way to give back. So for me, I think of that. It's like a bigger responsibility that you have. You got to create good content, for the kids, for the adults, or whoever's watching this stuff, the demographics, right? You got to have respect for your client. They expect quality work. So it's really a lot of different levels. You get hired to do a job. So the executives, the studio that hire you, they expect the best from you. But also we're delivering work to our clients. In this case, whether it's Netflix or Hulu, they also want quality work. So, and then you want to make sure that what you're doing is it's entertaining. It's the bigger message that you have.
Okay, so let's go back to what is Frank Molieri's advice? Because when you and I were growing up, there was no YouTube. Now you can reach the world with YouTube. Yeah. So for that little kid in Nicaragua or someplace else around the world who's interested in animation, what's your advice for them to get into the industry?
I've always said, Randy, obviously I can give you the cliche response, don't dream, follow your dreams. Everybody says, follow your dreams, it will come true. The reality is that you've got to work hard, man. You have to, and some people do tell you this with sincerity, that you do need to make phone calls. You do need to, or in this case, email, check websites, put your websites out. In this case, you got to put up really strong websites. But for me, it's the one thing that I've seen a constant on is the talent. The real talent will always rise to the top. There's always a way that people either get discovered, somebody will see your work, somebody's going to pull you in, you still got to do your work. And like you told me a long time ago, you learn your fundamentals. So for anybody wanting to get from my country or any other country, or even here, you want to get into the industry, get your foundation, strong foundation, learn your skills, be ready, have a good attitude, because it is a very collaborative world that we live in, and keep improving on your art. I think that's the only way, and never give up. I mean, for me, perseverance is not key, one of the key things. You just keep going and going and going and going, and you keep your dreams alive, and you just got to keep going, and hard work pays off. I mean, I do have to tell you this one thing, and then I'll close it up with some thoughts, but was it 2 years ago, a year ago or 2 years ago, I got a call from Chris Brunowski, who runs over at 10 Miles, and he says, hey man, we got this Project Runway thing. It's with Popeye, and love for you to do some animation here, man. Can you come over and do some? Can you just come check it out, see if you want to do it for me? Like 3 years ago, something like, I forget, Randy, maybe 3. And I'm like, oh man, I would love to do it. I email him back, but I'm really busy, like I don't really have the time. I don't want to give you like half my input, again, talking about taking respect for what you do, right? You want to give people your best. So I say no. I don't know if 6 weeks go by, and he says, can you just come and look at it? Just come and look at it. So he makes it seem like it's like 5 seconds, right? Over the phone, it's like, it's 5 seconds of animation. I go over there, and the thing, it turns out to be 45 seconds of animation. And I was just supposed to look at it. And he comes in and he gives me this thing. Well, Frank, I just kind of did a board here. I didn't direct nothing here. You do your thing, change whatever you want. Like, I got to go. And I never had the chance to say I really can't do it. So I ended up doing it. But you know, I got to tell you, Randy, I love working on it. And in fact, they said they never had this happen, but I can pull it aside here for you to read it to you. I had a letter from the guy who does in charge of the Popeye franchise. And he said, Popeye pencil animation, absolutely amazing. I couldn't love it more. It's a great balance between the late Fleischer, early Paramount years with the dose of Di Stefano, who's an amazing drawer in Popeye, you know, the draftsman. Really, really great work and funny. Forwarded, he says, please, to the artist. And this is from Chris Prynoski. And that's a gigantic compliment. But the funny thing is that here I was, a kid in Nicaragua, 6, 7 years old, watching Popeye, and in the whole circle, I mean, what is it, 40 years later or so, I end up working on it. And it's one of my favorite things that I've ever done. And I love it. And for me, after reading that email, which is really wonderful, right? And for me, it's always been like this. You get the compliments, because you can get an overly inflated ego. And I'm like, for me, I never let that ever get to me. Like, you know what, I'm really thankful. Thanks so much. It's a blessing to get a critique like that. But for me, it's like, I know where my strengths are and I know where my weaknesses are, because there are going to be times, again, going back to what do you say to the artist starting out, you can get criticism that will crush you, demoralize you even, or you can get overly praised and you think you're the best thing in the world. My advice to that is you need to know where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. That way, when you can stay balanced. When you get a really hard critique, you can say, well, you know what, I'm not great, but I'm not that bad. Or when somebody says you're amazing, you're like, oh, the greatest thing ever. You got to keep your ego in check and say, you know what, I think I got some talent, but I'm really not as good as they're saying I am. So for me, I've always been able to keep that balance. And then of course there are times you are going to get a critique that is going to hit right on target, and then you work on it. You're like, you know what, that is a good criticism. I'm not good at doing this. Then you work on it. So balancing out the kind of criticism you get throughout your career, because it can make a difference in the kind of work you do. It's like really staying true to yourself. And I'm not saying don't be arrogant, but definitely know where your weaknesses and strengths are. And one last thing, Randy, for me, like we were talking the other day about hiring, because now there's a lot of diversity groups and stuff like that, and getting minorities, more minorities into the animation or cultural diversity for me. And I don't know how it is for you, but it's never been an issue in my head, because when you, as an artist, when you draw, I mean, it doesn't say if you're black, if you're white, if you're Asian, if you're gay, if you're straight, if you're old, if you're young, if you're fat, if you're skinny. It says how good of an artist you are. And for me, that's always been my hiring motto when I'm looking for an artist. It's like, let's see your work. To me, it's like gender and all that is really, it doesn't even come into play, and it should never come into play. And I think in animation, I think we're blessed with that. At least I like to see it that way, because that's how it's always been for me. It's like, we see your work. And then the next very important thing after your talent is the kind of person that you are, the personality that you have. Can you collaborate? Are you easygoing? Can you be part of this team? And those things, to me, they're number 1 and 2 in my book, as far as when you go through the hiring process. So again, anybody the things you're gonna get discriminated on when you're looking for work or you're starting to get in the industry, I would say it's, for me and hopefully for other professionals, really a non-factor in our business, because it really comes down to your skills and the kind of person that you are, and that's what's gonna get you the job.
Well, you have the right kind of skills and you have the right kind of attitude, Frank Molieri. So I wish you nothing but success. And I want to say thanks for taking the time and having this little chat and sharing your thoughts and your story with other people. We're going to hopefully get it out there so they can hear it and experience it. And maybe you'll influence the next generation of animation talent.
I would love nothing more than that, Randy, and I'm blessed to have you as a friend. I wish you luck in your show. I think you're very creative, and I wish you luck as well.
All right, Frank. Thank you, Frank.
Welcome, Randy.
Randy.